First, let me introduce myself and tell you about our wonderful community. So my name is Mushakwe. I'm currently a product designer at Meta. And when I'm not designing at Meta, I'm currently a mentor on ADPList, where I speak with mentees from all across the globe on how to progress their careers, both from junior designers to senior designers also. And if you don't really know much about ADPList, ADPList started like it's a platform where we have people can find mentors from different aspects of their careers, and they can learn and grow and connect. We've hosted over 600 events and tackling a variety of topics, and all these events are recorded and shared on our channel. Our mission is to foster an inclusive space and support network for designers to come together to learn from each other and strive better. So if you haven't booked a session at ADPList today, please go to adplist.com and book a session with a mentor today. And here are some of our milestones. We have over 4,700 mentors. We've had 50,000 plus one-on-one section. We have over 600 plus events, and all these events are on YouTube. You can go there and access them. And we have mentees joining in from 70 plus countries across the globe. Really, really amazing. And here are guidelines for the events. These events will be recorded, and we also share a link in the chat, a pigeonhole link, where you can put your questions as speakers are talking, and we'll be able to take them at the end of this of the speaking. Also, please note, no hate speech or discriminatory behavior, please. And in a bit, we'll take some group selfies, kind of a wall of pictures to be able to record the event. And if you're talking about this, this event, either on your Twitter or LinkedIn, please use the social tag for ADPList and the hashtag for Amazing Together. And yes, I host Ying. Ying usually hosts this event. She's not around today, so I'm kind of stepping in for her. And yes, shortly we'll be going into the taking a group selfie. So please, if you're here, if you can please turn on your cameras, we'd like to see your faces so we can have this group selfie, and that'll be pretty amazing. I can see Anthony here. I can see Natalie over there. Thank you. I can see Dan. Yes, we'll quickly run through a quick session of selfies, and after that we can go into the session. Okay, thank you, Vivek. Thank you, George, for turning your camera. Nice to see you. And yes, I will quickly go through taking the images. So you can hold a pose, strike a pose, that'll be pretty amazing. So yes, let's see this amazing smile. So I'll go for the first screen in 3, 2, 1. And I'll go for the second screen, 3, 2, 1. And awesome, thank you so much. Yes, today, now we'll kind of dive into the session. And to give a quick intro of what this session is all about, design is becoming more important than ever in the business world. And the need for user experience is increasing, which means every company wants a designer. However, not every company has the budget or need for a full-time designer. So there's a chance that you probably work as a designer on a team of one. Trust me, I've been there before, from team of one to scaling, and probably the person who has to handle a wide range of tasks that are too much fun for one person to tackle. So today we have our mentors, Roger Zhu, lead product designer at Meta, and David Siglin, principal designer at Stitch Fix. And they're going to talk to us and we'll learn about their experiences and how they navigated the challenges of being a design team of one. And afterwards, we'll have time for an AMA with our speakers. So if you have burning questions, we have the pigeonhole link in there. You can please put your questions in there and we'll get to it, at the end of the program. Okay, let's get started. David and Roger, if you can unmute yourself, give a short introduction about who you are, your role, and we can, kind of get into the presentation.
Yeah, definitely. Really nice meeting everybody. My name is Roger. I'm the product designer in Meta, but I'll give it to David and he will kick us off with his presentations. And I'm really happy to talk about this topic.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll present and I'll do a little intro during my presentation. So let me go ahead and hit share. I'm going to ask the proverbial question. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up.
Yes, you can see your screen.
Awesome. So I'm going to remember to hit the timer so that I stay true to my time. My name is David Siglin. I'm a principal product designer at Stitch Fix. My focus there is really kind of on the interplay of algorithms and people. So it's like a pretty interesting space to work in. I kind of got my start on print design and then kind of moved into product design. So currently, kind of extracurricular activities, I do some startup advising, really kind of focused on product and design strategy. And I also put that one of my extracurricular activities is meeting new people, which is true. I love to meet new people, like through travel. I do like photography as well. So shout out if we have not met yet, please grab time like via ADPList if you want to talk. Also, I've included some of my social stuff down there too. I'll just say kind of is a quick bio as well. So before Stitch Fix, I was head of design at a fintech startup called Earnest, which is essentially like Venmo for real estate payments. And there I was like the founding designer. I was a solo designer for a while. So I have a lot of experience, kind of being the solo designer and then also like building teams. And then even before Earnest, I had a lot of experience doing, kind of being the only designer and kind of having to juggle what it means to be the only designer. So a lot of the things we'll look at are things that I've learned kind of the hard way. And my hope is that you don't have to learn them the hard way. So I'm calling this talk, How to Avoid Being the Raccoon Guy, subtitle being My Learnings from Being a Solo Designer. I don't know if you all have seen this GIF. It's pretty amazing. It's been going around my Twitter sphere and people have been using it for a lot of memes, but the reason why I picked this one is someone shared this and it was like, this is what it's like to be, a solo designer. And I agree because this was totally me. So like I was the raccoon guy. And what that meant was I was overworked. I was kind of burned out. I didn't know how to change it. And honestly, like part of me thought like, maybe this is what it means to be the only designer at like a fast growing startup or even like a more established company. And so you might ask, well, how did you get there? And it definitely wasn't intentional. I started out, like I said, in print design. I don't know if you know a ton about print design, but it's not very iterative, right? It's like almost the definition of waterfall. There's kind of this mad rush to get things done, get them done on time, normally under kind of huge constraint. And then you send it off to be printed or produced, and like that's it. You don't get to iterate on it. And so that gave me kind of this perfectionist streak coming out of that. And then I moved into UX design and dev. So doing both kind of UX design and development at the same time. And I was like super happy to break into tech. But then I was part of a company layoff. And so I had that job like 8 months. And so from there, I was kind of forced to do freelance. And some people are amazing at freelance. I'm not that person. And I, again, had this kind of perfectionist attitude already. And so I would just spend nights upon nights just working, because with freelance, it's either feast or famine. But again, just kind of reinforcing those bad habits I picked up. And then finally, I got into product design. And I landed my first full-time product design job. But I had all these kind of bad habits I picked up along the way. And if I were to summarize them, here's what I'm calling like my baggage. I was really bad at like prioritizing. I didn't know what the most important thing was for the company. I wasn't really good at figuring it out. I lacked boundaries. So people's problems would become my problems. And I just kind of had this like, well, I can kind of suck it up and grind it out mentality. I'll just put in more time. So again, like not great work-life balance. And then I love to check boxes off. I love to feel like I'm getting stuff done. But I was doing a lot of things and they weren't necessarily the most important things. And so again, that was kind of creating these like kind of bad cycles. So this is the motivational talk. And so I just want to set that up and say like, I've been there. I kind of know like what it's like. Here are some things that I've learned to be a healthy, happy solo designer. And those kind of get boiled down into three, what I'm calling good habits. One is be a partner. The second is have clear goals. And the third is leverage others. And so let's look at these in kind of more detail. So being a partner is really like how to be active, not reactive. And an example of someone that's reactive would be maybe like an internal contractor. And so I would define like internal contractor as someone that, well, who we think about the raccoon person, right? Like they're being given things. Often they lack awareness of like what the product strategy is, what the business goals are. And so they really kind of lack the awareness to know what they should do to like further the product and the business. They're not part of prioritization discussions. And so again, things are being given to them versus them choosing what to take on. So the opposite of that would be someone who is not reactive, but active. So I'm calling that person a partner. There's a couple of, this is someone that's like helping shape product strategy. And there's a couple of requirements of this. First, you need to know like the business needs, like AKA, what are the business goals? Also, that implies that the business you work for has goals, and I get it. Like working at an early stage startup, sometimes like there's not really goals, but you really kind of need to know like how does the business make money? What are the needs it has? You also need to know what the customer needs are through doing user research. And so if you know those two things, kind of like what the business needs are and what the customer needs are, then that's going to help you form an opinion on what the product strategy should be. I want to give you like a specific example. So when I was at Earnest, I had done some research to kind of uncover the fact that we needed to build essentially like a business dashboard. I knew that we made money through volume of transactions because we charge per transaction. And so I discovered this customer type that had a higher volume transaction, but we weren't serving them. We had like a native app. They were desktop based. And so through my knowledge of the customer, through my knowledge of the business, I was able to propose to the product team to say like, hey, we should go after this customer type. And so then what that meant is I was able to work with the product manager to kind of help shape that problem statement, help shape the use cases, and then also kind of plan out what the MVP is and the V1 and V2. And so again, that gave me a lot of sanity as I was working through this, because I was able to be active and able to say like, hey, here's the things I think we should do versus just being told what to do. So the second kind of habit is having clear goals. And this is just a way to avoid kind of overwork. So when I say like clear goals, this is kind of building on, helping shape the product strategy. So if you have these goals, these things that you're wanting to do that kind of span months, like how do you know you're making progress? Well, obviously you need to break that into smaller goals with like a clear time frame and a clear definition of done. So to give an example of a bad goal, I have this like, here's kind of this bad weekly goal, right? It's like super vague. It's too large. You're probably not going to write the entire research plan in a week. So opposite side, what's a good goal? Imagine like before this, we had a step that was like, hey, we need to draft like the research questions and like who to ask them to. So this kind of next step is it's very specific. It can be done in a week. And so this is like a great goal because it's like, okay, this is the next step. Here's how we're going to define it. This feels about right for a week's worth of work. Again, you kind of have to get a feel for that. One thing I'll call out is like be aware of risks. So like for this, a risk might be, can I schedule a meeting early enough in the week so that I have time to revise those questions? But if you're setting weekly goals and you're able to like nail those down, that's going to help you, again, not overwork. And so an example here is at Stitch Fix, we use Asana to track work. And so every Monday morning we have this ritual where we're like, okay, what are the things we need to work on? Always like 3 to 4 things. Let's go ahead and write a clear definition done that we want to have accomplished in the week. And so then the next Monday we would come back, we say, okay, did we accomplish this? If no, why not? And then what's kind of that next logical step? Let's go ahead and write like a definition done. And so that helps keep us sane and also kind of helps keep us on task. And then the third habit is what I'm calling leveraging coworkers, especially like when you're a design team of one. So think about user research specifically. Again, user research as a designer, that is, one of the things that we do and that we're good at. And that's actually one way, again, that we can help shape product strategy. And the thought here is, you should automate a lot of this research. Like you can automate surveys. If you think about like different touch points across the customer journey, you're going to want to automate a lot of that stuff. You're going to want to look at like quantitative data, like look at dashboards to help you understand what people are doing and also to kind of form cohorts. But, at some point, and honestly, like you should be doing this a lot, like you're going to talk to customers one-on-one. That is, that can be a lot, especially for a single designer, especially if you want to talk to like a statistically significant amount of people, right? So an example here is when I was doing research for that business dashboard at Earnest, I actually leveraged the marketing and sales team and actually one of the co-founders as well. And I taught them how to do generative user research. So what I did was I kind of walked them through what are the best practices, how not to introduce bias, all those kind of things like we know that should be done, but obviously they weren't aware of. And I created a script for them to follow, and then they could basically just fill it out as they get the answers. And I also gave them like a cheat sheet that had like best practices, just so they could like remember like, oh, I should not ask leading questions. Like, oh, I should ask like these questions. And the outcome of that was we were able to talk to like, I think it was like 20 to 40 people. It was a pretty big number for just going and talking to people, especially as a solo designer, but I was able to break it up. And so that was much more manageable than me like trying to go and talk to all those people. So just to recap, 3 good habits: be a partner, have clear goals, leverage other people as much as you can. So those are the habits. I want to talk to you about like a technique. And so the goal of this technique is to move forward at the right time so that you waste less time rehashing decisions. So you're basically like making the decisions at the right time. This comes out of me like kind of constantly, again, like learning by not doing it right, getting ahead of myself and trying to answer too many questions at once, and then just leading to confusion, not only for me, but also like for my team. This technique is basically just answering a bunch of questions. We don't have time to answer all the questions. There's about 7 of them. I should probably give a talk another point about like this framework, but I want to look specifically at the 2 circled questions we have. And I want to show like a technique per question that will kind of help you work through this. So the first question is like, how might we enable customers to complete their goals? And I put like, let's be lazy. Again, that's kind of the overarching theme of these thoughts. It's like, how can you do the least amount of work and get the maximum amount of like return out of it? And so for answering that question, the technique that I normally do, and these are, again, kind of techniques, and I think you can kind of figure out what works best for you. But the technique that I do is I do a lot of exploration through writing. And the reason why I do this is, I mean, if you think about low fidelity, it honestly can't get much lower fidelity than writing something out. And it's also easy for engineering and product to do these explorations as well. And so what we're doing is we're essentially just kind of like, we're writing out user journeys, or kind of like in a story form of like, I'm a person and I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to do this thing. And here's kind of like the thing I want to do. And here's kind of like the goal. We're just writing that stuff out. And so we're able to like really just churn out a bunch of ideas that we'll then come back later and talk about. But, think about Double Diamond, we're just kind of generating ideas, and it's a super quick way to generate ideas. It's very inclusive, like everyone, is able to write versus like, not everyone's able to draw or diagram. And so that's how I approach it. I just approach it as like kind of a writing exercise. Once we have these kind of different options down, then we do what I call like a go, no go, pro con workshop. And with this, I'll show an example of what that looks like here in just a second. But we want to see if any of these options are kind of universally agreed on. This is a no-go, right? And so we can knock that out real quick. Then we want to think of what are the pros and cons for these different approaches. Again, this is very high level. It's just written out. And so we want to think about kind of 3 things, like what's the technical pro and con? That's more of the engineering perspective. Like what's the UX pros and cons? That's more of the design perspective. But the third one is kind of like what's like the product vision pro con. So if we think about where the product wants to go in 12 to 18 months, will these different options get us there? And so we're evaluating the different options based on that. So to give you kind of a visual example, here we have 3 options, and one of these, it turns out, has a no-go. And so again, this means that, the team looking at this, everyone agrees, yeah, this is not a great idea. We should eliminate this. And so then we have these other two ideas that there's like no clear winner, like they have pros and cons each, but the team can't really make up their minds. And like, that's fine. Like, it's easy to get into this mode that you want to just like eliminate down to one option right now. And that's actually probably not healthy. If you find the team is like spinning their wheels and not really able to make a decision, it's fine to basically take those options and take them to the next round, because the next round is kind of exploring it in more detail. And it's often there that you start to understand better, like what the pros and cons are. And just real quick, you know, this is like based on a session I did recently. I'll say like this kind of like go, no go, pro con technique has become very popular with the team I work on. And we've been using it a lot. It's been getting a lot of people like really enjoy just kind of how quickly it is. So then kind of the next question in that sequence of questions is like, how might we understand in detail the steps a customer will take to accomplish goals? And so here is where I generally get visual. So again, we had that really kind of quick explorations through text. Now it kind of helps to get more visual. And so this is where we kind of start diagramming things. The reason why I like to get visual here is because this is where the ideas get complex. So we're starting to kind of get into the more nitty gritty. And so in order to build alignment so that people don't have to like hold these different complex ideas in their head, we visualize it, and that helps people understand, like we're basically creating like a shared understanding and building alignment around this. So again, we want to get as detailed as we can about these user steps, you know, when and where those steps would happen. We can even show this to customers and get their feedback, right? To kind of see if there's any kind of unpalatable options here. And then we can kind of reuse that pro con check, right? Where it's like, okay, based on what we've learned, what are the pros and cons? Can we eliminate any options? And so an example here would be, this is like an onboarding flow that I did when I was exploring a couple of different options for how we might onboard an organization into that business dashboard. And so with this particular flow, I realized there's a lot of dead ends on this flow. And so it wasn't really until I visualized it that I understood that, and like engineering and I were able to have these discussions. And so there's another flow where we could rearrange things so that we didn't have those dead ends. And once we were able to see that, again, that's kind of like clarity. It's like, oh, well, we should obviously go with this other flow because we don't want people to end up in dead ends. And then again, just kind of like I did this for a research plan, so you can kind of use it for all kinds of stuff. It just helps visualize the different decision points and how like you can bring clarity to all these kind of branching options in a research plan. It really helps the team visualize that. So just to recap the techniques, you know, we have these different questions. You know, for the first one, I'm often like writing, it's great because it's kind of fast and broad. But then as you start to get into the more nitty gritty, we really want to help kind of build alignment through visuals. And that's a great time to start doing that. And that is my talk. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Roger.
Thank you so much, David. It's really great to hear you about some of the topics. I think many of our talks points are overlap. We have maybe different techniques, but overarching they're the same. I'm really excited to share some of the things I have learned. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm hoping this is working. And okay, I see thumbs up. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about being a design team of one. Thank you, ADPList, for having me. And it's so great to hear David's talks earlier as well. And first, I want to say hello and a little bit about myself. I joined Facebook back then in 2019, 3 years ago. And since at the time, I was doing mostly A/B testing on cupcakes and decided which cupcakes to give the users. And this is but jokes aside, I think mostly I work on kind of product for businesses. And very recently, I changed different teams. I started to working on AR and VR and building the next computing platforms for our users. And But today, the topic is about being a design team of one, and Meta is not a design team of one. Really nice to see our host is my Meta fellow designers as well. But I think if you're interested in this topic, it's very likely you are in a startup, or you're in a 0 to 1 team, or you're on a special project that's you are the only designer on the team. And it's usually means that you're very much like resource constrained. And so some of the things I want to talk about today is, first one is about managing yourself. Managing myself. And the second one is about building a support network. And the last one is, I think, some of the reward and challenges about being a design team of one. I would talk a little bit about my experience at a company called Panorama Education. Very much like David, I joined a startup before coming to Meta. And this is a company I joined. It was founded by 2 undergrad students in Yale. It was based in Boston. And I joined the team in 2015 as the first designer. And I spent about 4 years in Panorama, growing from 20-ish people to, I think nowadays, around 400. This was my desk at the time in the company. You can see really messy. It's in the corner with all the printers, but it was really kind of exciting time to join the company. A little bit of context, the company was mostly working on K-12 education SaaS software for teachers and school leaders across the United States. So mostly K-12s. This is our products. We do kind of survey for teachers, educators. We bring the data and to the teachers and educators across the United States as well. We ask student questions through surveys. Some of them printed out as papers. Some of them are digital as well. The first one I want to talk about is about managing myself. There is very much overlap between kind of what David talked about being the raccoon guy. And this is, I think, my recommendations is that you definitely want to making sure, like, am I solving the right question, right problem? And if there's only one takeaway from this talk, this will be always asking yourself, am I spending time solving the right problem? And very much because your time is very limited, and you're probably the constrained resources to the team. So you want to dedicate your time where it needs the most. And another way to ask this question for yourself is that you want to ask, where will this project, design, or task I'm doing really help my company succeed? And this is another way to ask it. And how do I know, or how do you know? It's actually very easy, just by ask. You can ask your team, you can ask your customers, you can ask your product team members, and just ask. So when I first joined the team, I did a survey with all the team members I have. The first thing I did was asking my team, like, which part of the products need the design the most. So that as you can see on the right side, that's the survey result, and you can see some parts we don't need a design at all. And the analytic view is say, hey, our teacher's report, which is analytic view, needs the most time to spend on design. So this gave me direction to say, okay, this is where we think the company needs the most. So on the right side, you can see that's where the analytical review at the time. And this is where you get to know your products. This was a product in 2015. So you can see we have a really robust database, but it's very much like a CSV spreadsheet, very hard to navigate. That's the biggest challenge I had, which is providing a product that's easy to navigate. But I think for you, it's probably a little bit different. And so depending on the company you're in, the team you're on, your product may be in very different stages. It's very likely like the product doesn't even exist at all. So your time is probably spent the most to understand like what product to build. So meaning like talking to lots of customers. And meanwhile, in my case, like the product needs a lot of rework. That's also another way. And it's also possible that where the product is actually relatively mature, it's making money, it's doing great, and the growth is the most important thing that you want to focus on. So this is where you probably want to spend energies on your marketing materials, the website, the emails, CSM. So those are really depend on the stage of the company and the product. You want to spend your energy differently. The last thing is never waste of time is to get to know your users. Our dedicated user is our K-12 students. I never went to K-12 schools in the United States. So I actually took the time to volunteer in Boston Public Schools to teach a class and get to know my users, get to see how the products was being used and know the challenges of our customers and our users as well. There's another way that you can learn about your users, not just by qualitatively, but also quantitatively. Like there are lots of tools out there, for example, Heap, Full Story, and the Google Analytics. These are all the tools you can use to understand how the users are kind of coming into the product in different patterns. And this helps you to see like what the personas are among different type of people. So to recap, managing yourself is really about solve the right problems. And you can do that by asking your teams. You can do that by know your products really well. You can also do that by know your customers and know your users as well. So that's kind of the first things I want to talk about. The second thing is about really building the support network. Being a design team of one is really, really challenging, and you wanted to have a support networks to really help you grow and also help you work as well. So I have 3 different recommendations. The first one is actually thinking about hire a new designer, and you probably are kind of sounds ridiculous. You're probably thinking, hey, I just got here, why do I need to hire another person? I don't even understand what's going on. But it's very likely depends on the trajectory of your company. If it's on a growth trajectory, it's very likely your team is going to double within a short period of time. So this is a great time for you to figure out how the growth of the teams are, have a working plan with your people managers, your HR team members, and figure out a plan to set up an interview process as well. And because this is a great way for you to find the right person who is very likely work very closely to you in the next a few months or a few years even. So the photo here is one of my design partners. His name is Terrence. It took us about 200 candidates to actually finally land this candidate and find Terrence to join our company. So it definitely takes a long time. So just by sheer time of planning, you wanted to start quickly about hiring plans. The second one, recommendations I have very similar to kind of some of the things David talked about, is find some of the like-minded team members, your cross-functional team members. And one thing I find really helpful or I find useful to do is just run a design sprint. And by doing the design sprint itself, it's very easy for you to align the team with others. And it's also an opportunity for you to connect some of the team member who is really interested in the design or have their perspective on design or the product as well. And you probably by the end of the exercise know the direction of the product as well. So it's a great way of actually building your own support networks within your company. So in this view here, this is where we did our design sprint. And the 2 person on here, one of them is engineer, one of them is marketing team members. So all 3 of us get to kind of work extensively for a week, and we get to know each other and also learn from each other as well. This is also kind of classic design sprint. You do lots of sketches, but at the same time, when you are showing those sketches to other team members, you, for example, sales team members, customer success team members, you hear their feedbacks, and they also get a peek about how design is done. So this way, you build a kind of a culture within your company about how the design is made. You also get a chance to hear from your CEO, from your founders as well, so know the directions of the team, and then get some of the buy-ins from your founders and from the leaders. Last but not least, I would say you want to think about kind of finding a support network outside of your company as well. So for example, ADPList is a great place to find great mentors to kind of coach you on one-on-one basis. I think this is really, really awesome. This kind of product and services exist today. The other one is you can also leverage your own networks. So there's very likely the people you know who is a designer, who is a little bit more senior than you, or maybe having a little bit more years in the industry than you, and they can be a great way to just set up let's say a weekly coffee chat and see where things are. And this is a great way for you to show the progress. And sometimes when you get stuck, ask for feedbacks from the other team members as well. So that's another way to really find your support networks. Awesome, cool. The last thing I want to talk a little bit about is kind of some of the reality of being a design team of one. There's definitely challenges and there are definitely rewards as well. In addition to become like being asked by all the different people at the same time, I think that one of the things I definitely observe is being a design team of one, it may be a little bit hard to advance your career. because usually being a design team of one, you don't have a really clear trajectory or career ladders. And especially for designers, because it's very likely in those organizations or those teams, you are reporting to a person who is probably don't have design background. So in my case, I was reporting to the head of technology. So he's an engineering background. And he definitely is very supportive of my growth, but he did actually simply don't know how to grow a designer. And I think that if you can identify yourself as a self-learner, I think that's totally fine. I think you'll be okay in those environments. But if you are somebody who really needs lots of coaching and teaching, I think it can be a little bit challenging for you. And the second part is, I think, like David mentioned earlier, the work life is just not super balanced. It's very typical that you put 16-hour weeks within a week, and sometimes it can definitely lead to burnout. So I think those are like the real challenges that you're going to have. At the same time, of course, they are also rewarding as well. I think I myself find it's really helpful to have like really accelerated learning, because in many times that you're doing something new or something different. For example, in this role, I learned how to do user research. I learned how to do user analytics and a little bit product management. And because in often cases, just nobody else is doing it, and you look around, you're probably the most qualified person to do that, and nobody else is have the time. So you have to really learn that on your job. The photo you see here is I'm actually doing like a code, not essentially a training of how to use the software to the school district leaders. So essentially teaching the software. That's something I learned on the job as well. So that's really rewarding for me, I think, as a learner. At the same time, you also get to know your business as well, because regardless of your role, like David mentioned, you're going to know how your business is doing. Because if it's a small company, it's an environment from 0 to 1. Your job essentially depends on it, and it's very likely a startup fails. So if you're not doing the right thing, it's very likely your company is going to fail, and you're not going to have a job. And the other reason is that the people sitting next to you is very likely going to make a sales phone call, and she's going to tell you what happened, and she's going to tell you like why the client didn't like the product or didn't buy the product, and you get those instant feedbacks. You understand the business really well. So the photo I'm showing here is one of our sales team members at the time, and we were kind of drawing the map, and she made a really critical call, sorry, got distracted. And she made a really critical call and landed on a client of the whole state, which is Iowa. So that's really great and to learn. At the same time, like we see the growth of the company over time, like across the United States. So this is also super rewarding for you. The last but not least, I think it's really a lifelong friendship, because you're in such a kind of mission-driven environment. You're spending so much time with your team members. You're very likely to work with them, learn from them, and also they will be your friends and can help you expand your worldview as well. So those are great rewards of being a design team of one, because you get to learn from people who is not designers, who have very different worldview than your own worldview. So yeah, I would say very much thank you everybody here, and especially for having me. And I'm really looking forward to answering questions. Like David, you can also find me on LinkedIn. This is my name, and also I write about how to be a first designer in a startup on Medium as well. So you're more than welcome to take a read as well. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for these presentations. Let's give a round of applause to our speakers. Like, this has been very insightful and yeah, really amazing. Yep. So we'll go into the Q&A section next. I know we have some questions in the pigeonhole. I have some of my questions that I want to ask you guys, first of all, because, I've been in this situation before. And I've also had mentees reaching out to me saying, hey, how do I overcome this challenge? And it's something you kind of touched on in your last part of the presentation, but I want to ask both of you. As a solo designer, you're working in, as the only designer, how do you get to grow your craft and improve? Because you don't have people to bounce information off. You don't have anybody to critique your work. How have you guys tackled it? And, I would, ask David to kind of chip into that first, then Roger.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, this is going to be a bit of a weird answer, but I honestly got inspiration by listening to podcasts not even related to design. So I really love behavioral economics. And so just kind of like to me as a designer, I get inspiration by learning about people and kind of fostering like that curiosity. And so maybe that's kind of like the high level thought is continue to foster your curiosity even with stuff outside of design. But then obviously, kind of keeping up with like what the latest kind of design trends and best practices are. A lot of times that's just kind of going through websites and kind of finding like best of lists, that kind of stuff as well. But I think for me, kind of the high level takeaway is just like foster curiosity, no matter where that is, even if that's not necessarily through like actual design, even if it's through like podcasts or reading or talking to people, learning about how someone does their job. To me, is always inspiring.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. Roger, what do you think?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. And I would say that it's probably one of the harder things I need to balance when I was only a design team of one, because many times that the work itself is needed so urgently that you probably don't have the time to really kind of refine it and to get to the level of finish you wanted. Like David mentioned, I think having a curious and learning mindset is very, very important. And I think at the time for me, some of the benefit is being a design team of one, you get to pick whatever the tool you wanted to use. So regardless if it's Figma or some of the latest ones, this actually is very beneficial. And I remember when I first onboarding our second designer, Terrence, at the time, this probably shows how dated it is. He never heard of Sketch. It was the first time he ever used it. And so this was like one of the, I think, benefit of actually being a design team of one. You get to pick the tools you wanted to use. And then another part about pushing for the crafts of yourself, I think that's very much self-directed as well. I think that, like I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, the time you're spending is helping the company succeed. And if there are type of areas or projects that really needs a high level of craft, for example, when I was there, I was helping one of the sales and demo pitch to one of the big clients, and that was really high level of fidelity and really high level of finish for this particular client. So those are the opportunity that you wanted to step in, and you can also volunteer to say, hey, CEO or the project lead, hey, I think this project deck, if I spend a little bit more time, I can get to a level of craft that will really delight our customers. Can I work on that? So finding those opportunities and spending time on them, and also your team members will appreciate your effort, and also you get to practice your craft as well. Great question.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that. And I want to add a part of my own experience to that. In my last job when I was at KPMG, I was like, I started a design team similar to what you were doing, and it's an enterprise space, a very complex space, and unlike consumer goods where you can consumer products where you can actually go and download an application and see, enterprise products are usually behind lock and keys, and you don't know what anybody else is working on. So it was really hard because you had to just create something out of nothing. And for me, what really helped me was like, leaning on design community, like you mentioned earlier, like, of course, I was able to share all the information about my project because of NDAs and, I don't want to be sued, but basically saying, hey, like, has anyone been in the, auth federation space, for example? Have you done a large scale migration? Can someone tell me how you went about this? And just kind of rubbing minds and learning from people, like, someone will say, hey, check out Atlassian's product, check out Google's product. They did it, they did that. And I'll try for myself, see those patterns and, kind of redo it. And it was really helpful for me to like, see those things out there and kind of try to refine my craft. I was always mostly on product hunts, like, just checking out products, testing them, trying them out, getting insights, and as I was going on to like, I was kind of getting feedback from my other team members too, because, people, they might not be designers, but they kind of know what good design is and usability. So it was really very helpful. And I'll kind of go into my second question, then I'll take some questions from the Pigeonhole link. And this is one thing I also noticed too, like as a solo designer, you guys joined the company, then you had more team members and you scaled. How did you get buy-in for design? Like, most startups and co, getting design to be at the forefront on the table is usually a challenge because most people don't really know and value about design. Do you run into those challenges at your workplace, and how did you get design to be, top priority for everyone in the company?
David, I will start this one, and then I'll hand this hot potato topics to you. I'm definitely curious about how you solve that problem. Yeah, I think I think it's more so, let's say 10 years or 5 years ago. I don't know how David see this, but I think more and more recently, I think because the level of the finish of our day-to-day products have, including, for example, right now, Zoom we're using, Slack we're using, those kind of products, their level of experience is becoming so much better. I think it's harder, it's easier for designers to have a voice, have a seat at the table, and really advocating for kind of the quality and the craft of the experience. But you're definitely right. Like there are areas and challenges that I think that the design doesn't need, is the voice doesn't heard. I think in most of those cases, the way I try to do is to think about like the delight, and think about how to using that delight to support the success of the business. It's really not that easy to turn that into a business metric, but at the same time, like having a delight, say, hey, this really good design can help us bring delight into the sales call, kind of really help the user experience a little bit better. So those are the opportunities I will kind of make an advocate for those opportunities, and also advocate for design.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So like when I worked at Earnest, our CEO wasn't from a tech background. And so when we think about, like, if someone's from a tech background, like they kind of understand, at least there tends to be more of a buy-in for the value of design. And this was not the case. And so what that meant was I kind of had to start from square one. And so I had to even kind of educate around like what the difference was between like product design and graphic design. And so kind of educating around that. So in this case, kind of what really helped cement the value of design was through user research. So showing like how we brought to light like the customer needs. And so not only doing that, but then also like doing it repeatedly and creating a forum for that. So we had kind of what we call like voice of the customer. And so, me being product design and later with other designers, we really were the ones leading that. And so we were saying like, here's what we found. And so we were actively sharing with the CEO and everyone else at the company, here's what we're finding out, here's what we're seeing, right? And that over time was one way that we kind of won trust and kind of showed the value of design. But it was obviously like a very kind of uphill battle. And I'll say another way we did it too was again, kind of through actually showing the impact. So there was like this particular point in when someone goes to pay, like if they go pay money for their house, there was, I think it's like a 30% drop off rate with people. Like there's kind of something was going on where people were not, they were just like dropping off. And so showing the power of user research to go out and understand why that was happening, we were able to cut that in half. And so that right there, being able to point to that, like to the CEO and other people and say, look, through user research, through great user experience, we were able to very much impact kind of the bottom line of the company. Here's like the value of what we bring. And then again, kind of down the road, we actually like won some awards for our app. And so that was super interesting because that then really kind of changed the narrative as well, where like now, going to these stakeholders and presenting to them, we're able to like to tout like, look, like we've won awards with this. It's like super user friendly. So yeah, it was definitely, I would say that particular job was probably one of the things I learned the most out of was how to present for design and like how to argue for the value of design. because that was definitely something that, you know, was not necessarily like appreciated right off.
Awesome. Thanks for that amazing response. And, you know, it kind of resonates with me also too, like, you know, working in a space where people didn't even like, they didn't understand what design was. Theirs was, give me the wireframes, give me the high fidelity, like, you know, design something, knock something out. But then by, you know, like you mentioned, the voice of the customer sessions where and they get to listen to those sessions to see the value of design. You know, they can see something is not working and they see good feedback. People are, you know, commending it. It helps to sell UX and it gives you more time to, you know, advocate for research, like, you know, get more time in a very eng-led company where engineers kind of dictate what to do. It kind of saw that value in there. So thanks so much for that response. Yeah. We have a question here in Pigeonhole, and I think that one is for you, David. It says, like, you know, how did you get your start into product design and development when you had a print design background? And how did you know that freelance wasn't for you?
I mean, I'm a horrible salesperson, so that's why freelance wasn't for me. No, I really value working like as a team, and so, you know, freelance does have a lot of great aspects to it, right? Like you are kind of able to maybe be more free in what you do, and maybe a little more, you know, like you can work from wherever, which obviously now, like, you know, through the pandemic, a lot of us are able to realize that as well. But, you know, I really valued working closely on a team and working with teammates. And so I found that, you know, kind of was lacking through freelance. And I really wanted to work on things that were long term. So not working on something for like 6 months, you know, or whatever, like really kind of digging into something. So that's kind of like for me why freelance wasn't a thing. How did I transition? Yeah, so I was print design. I burned out on print design pretty hard, and I went and worked IT for a while. That didn't make it into the presentation because it's kind of like not really needed to know. But while I was working in IT, I taught myself how to code. And then through that, I landed that role at a startup out in New York called Wonderkind. And that was like kind of this hybrid role. And so it was really like me kind of putting the time to learn like coding as a way then to, you know, kind of say like, look, I can do both like design and development. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And then from there, you know, kind of transitioning into just kind of full product design.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was really pretty interesting. Like our careers take different paths, but, you know, I'm happy you're here now. I have one other question, which is really pretty interesting because, you know, you guys mentioned, you know, you started as an own designer, you hired people and you scaled your team and all that. And how did you, because it's, you know, we as something that as designers, you've been on the side where you're interviewing, like, you know, someone is interviewing you, but how did you go from being solo designer to hiring designers and scaling your team and all that? Like, you know, when did you know was the right time to hire more people? And, you know, I'm sure there might be someone in your shoes now. How did you go about that? Looking for the candidate, interviewing, creating processes and all that stuff. So just curious to hear how you guys handled it. And I'll pass it to Roger to kind of start first if you have any ideas.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good question. I would say, I think usually it's a shared decision. It's usually not a decision that a design team can make or the HR team can make or your partner team can make. It's very much shared. I think the time I find the most important is where you start to see like the ratio of, for example, engineering team members to design or to products is not very balanced. And I think one designer to, let's say, 8 engineer is fine ratio, and it can go even a bit bigger. But once you go beyond that, it's very likely that this ratio is not correct. And I think that what you probably want it, depending on the type of the products you have, if it's very consumer driven, it's very likely like 1 to 5 or even smaller than that. And then if it's an enterprise, maybe a little bit higher kind of in terms of ratio. But this is where you find early signs that you probably need to scale the team. The other part is potentially just looking ahead of what works needs to be done. And if there is lots of kind of new products needs to be built, and you're looking at them, and you're thinking about the times that they needs to be out there in the customer's hand, and you see that's not something that's reasonable timeline for just one designer team, and that's the best time you voice up to say, hey, like, I think this may be a little bit too much, and we needed to scale the team. Hopefully we can kick off a hiring process. David, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was trying to just kind of taking notes and thinking through things. So like Roger, like you're saying, like looking down the road for sure, right? Like, do you kind of see like things coming up that you're like, you know what, I don't think I'm gonna be able to handle this. Like, we really need to like hire someone else. So I think it, like, you kind of view it like, is that also, you know, if you kind of realize that you've been the roadblock for a while, it's like there will be times, you know, where obviously being the solo designer, there's not enough of you to go around, and maybe that comes and goes. But if it gets to the point where it's clear, like to you, and it'll probably be clear to everyone else, like, okay, this is not going to let up, that generally is a time to think, should we hire someone else? And so like at Earnest, our marketing efforts were really ramping up. And so I was having to kind of be split between like marketing and kind of product. And so like my first hire was a marketing designer, and specifically not only to like untap marketing, but that's also like where I was weakest. And so I wanted to hire someone to kind of feel that weak spot, right? And so I hired like a marketing visual content designer who was able to own that space, still work with me, but like able to own that space while I kind of focus more on the product side of things. And then kind of like Roger, like you were saying, like the hire after that was a product designer, because our product started to expand, right? And so then like, okay, this, like, I can see things coming, we need to hire another product designer. So yeah, I would say, like, you know, if you see yourself being a roadblock for a long time, or like you see things coming down the road, think about, you know, where you're weakest at. You know, is there someone I could hire to do like an aspect of my job that I am not great at, or like don't want to do? You know, and then think about that, and then think about how like you can work together, right, to kind of create better things rather than like having to work by yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that response. Yeah. Oh, yeah, something.
Totally. I have like one very small story to share. I don't know if most of you know, like I think today, when I first joined Facebook, you can actually write your own titles in the workplace too. And one of, not myself, but another designer, fellow friend, and he write his own job title is bottleneck, because he was serving too many engineers at the same time, so he became a bottleneck. So if that's the time come back, like David said, if you think you are the bottleneck, that's the time we wanted to scale the team. So that's the story.
Exactly. And, you know, like once you get to that point, voice out, because you might get burnt out. Yeah. I know we're at about time. There's just one more question that I want us to quickly touch on, and we can use that to conclude. And the question goes, do you have tips or insights for transitioning from a solo designer in a small company to a designer working in big teams in a big or large company? So we can use that to round off. And yeah. Does anyone want to go first? Any tips for like transitioning from solo designer to, like, you know, working in a bigger company in big teams?
Yeah. Roger, do you have anything that comes to mind? Otherwise,
yeah, to be honest, that's a great question, but I never really think through. And one thing I do want to say is I was working in a company at a time, and I was happy, and but the reason I joined Meta at the time was because I'm curious how a bigger organization is functioned or worked, and that was one of the biggest motivation. I changed job at the time, and I don't have something come to my mind at this point. Maybe see for another talk.
It's interesting you said that about wanting to learn how a bigger company, because exactly the same, right? Like I'll say, like, I was just trying to write down notes. I think at a bigger company in general, what you'll find is some tips would be get good at stakeholder management, because there's going to be a lot of stakeholders. And get really good at concise communication. I'm a big believer in like written cultures. the smallness of a team, like a startup, can kind of hide the lack of good communication. At a big company, again, multiple levels, multiple stakeholders, you will find out very quickly, like I found out, like, okay, I need to get better at communicating. So I would say, like, to get just some tips, think about how you can communicate more concisely, more clearly, get good at writing, get good at kind of presenting. Those kind of things will really help you, I think, if you move to like a larger company, because that's going to kind of be key, communication.
Exactly. And just to add that, like that thing of communication, when I transition also too, because you have very large teams, it's important for you to be able to communicate and share your work with everyone, get visibility. In a smaller company, everyone knows you're working. In a bigger company, nobody might know you're actually doing your work. So how do you get promoted? By communicating and sharing your work with everyone. So yeah, thank you so much. We are way over time. Like, please, we have the links in the chat, like in the chat, if you want to connect with David and with Roger, like you can have more discussions. This recording is available also on YouTube. You can kind of watch it again if you want to. And we've come to the end of this session. Thank you so much for listening in, and we'll see you in the next one. And Roger, David, please, Maggie, please wait behind. We'll have a debrief. But yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you in another session, and we have ended this session right now. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Yes. Let me stop the recording. Yes.